Kumbi 2017. Thank you very much for staying with us here on KTN News. Like I promised, we wanted to now have a conversation here in studio, just putting really everything into perspective. Let me reintroduce my guest, and I'll start from my extreme right, the one who's extremely furthest from me. That's Dr. Isaac Kalua, who's an environmentalist, but he's also a commentator on national issues. Thank you very much for joining us. All right, seated right next to him is Dr. Shemo Chwotho. Like I mentioned, he is the chair of the Kenya Diaspora Alliance. He's going to be talking to us really about what Kenyans really are saying across the borders, about what is happening in their country. Also, we will be having Professor Gitile Naitole, who's the National Cohesion and Integration Commission. He's also going to be chiming in into this very important discussion. And last but not least, seated right next to me is Barak Muluka, who's the Secretary General of the Amani National Congress. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on KTN News as we have a very difficult conversation in difficult times. And I'll just want to start with you, Barak Muluka. How can you describe Kenya right now?
Well, Kenya, as a professor here, who is also a poet, was saying, is turning and turning in the widening Gaia, meaning confusion. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the earth. The best lack all conviction. The worst are full of passionate intensities. And things are falling apart. I think the gentleman from Cohesion and Integration will be able to explain to us a little bit about where we have come these past 6 years, 7 years, in fact almost 10 years since we began these things of national cohesion and integration. But I think that the things that have divided us seem to be gaining more and more significance and momentum. And the fact that we cannot agree on how to hold an election is only a symptom of deeper lying challenges.
All right. And we'll come to the nitty-gritties of really with the political environment. But let me come to you, Professor, and he's put you on the spot talking about cohesion. Seems like this election really has awakened some underlying currents.
Yes, there appears so. You know, we always have our challenges. But we always worked through those challenges. This country never had cleavages that really managed to separate us. But now it appears those cleavages are emerging and widening. So it will require us to transcend ourselves, as it were, and really look at those issues which are creating this division or this emerging division. We just have to learn to separate the politicians with the problem, because clearly there is a problem. Nobody can deny that there is a problem. But for us to be able to address this problem, we need to separate the problem from the people who are involved. Because right now we don't seem to be able to do that. We seem to have not respecting one another, because it's very crucial that the leaders respect one another.
Right.
We seem to have, I like using South Africa as a very good example. The apartheid system was horrible, terrible. But Mandela never disrespected those leaders because he knew finally we would have to deal with them to solve his problem.
All right.
So we don't seem to be doing that ourselves. There is all this now confusion which is coming in. And unless it's arrested now, because they ought to be arrested now, it's going to create a problem for us. This is a very weak country.
All right.
Economically, it's extremely weak.
Now.
This country cannot sustain a prolonged conflict. It can't sustain it. In this city, we hit indirectly from the market. You know, the food from Western distributed to the satellites. If you want to disrupt that supply for 1 week, people don't just starve. You don't have to shoot them. They don't just starve. So because we are so weak, we can't afford this conflict.
We can't afford this conflict. No. Dr. Shemo Chwotho, coming to you, what are Kenyans outside our borders saying about what is happening back home? Are they as concerned as we are?
Betty, before I say anything, allow me please to declare my interest. I come from a region that's mourning Homa Bay County and the larger Nyanza region is in mourning. That's my first declaration of interest. The second, ordinarily, on a Friday night like this, Sabbath started with sunset. I wouldn't be in a studio. So this just underscores the gravity of the matter that we are dealing with. I did check with my church elder. Do I go on Sabbath or don't I? He did say, look, it's like a case of your cattle falling in a dip on Sabbath. But then further, when I didn't realize gladly that IBC had called off or postponed the elections that were meant to be done tomorrow in an area that's predominantly Adventist. The other reason I was coming was to protest to that, and I'm glad that is now something behind us. But having said that, Kenyans outside the country are equally perturbed about what's happening. I think if anyone has been resisting dialogue, this is a time that we must, as Kenyans, come together and have candid dialogue. Recognize that we have problems, that we are in this together, and we must find a solution together. It's not the time for brinkmanship. While initially, I think the Kenya Diaspora Alliance was probably the first to go public to call for dialogue between the two principles. But I think now the matter has gone beyond the principle. So we need a conversation, a national conversation with and between ourselves.
All right, but the thing is, we've been talking about that national conversation for quite some time. We'll be talking about how do we actually have this national conversation. Does it come from the top leadership coming down to us? But Dr. Kalua, coming to you, didn't we see this coming? I mean, is it surprising, you know, where we are right now? One Kenya that has two different faces. On one hand, you know, people were able to exercise their right to vote. On the other hand, the people who did not do that are sort of like you know, dealing with some serious situations that, like what we've been seeing in Kisumu, Migori, Siaya.
Like a small kid would play with mud, not knowing the effect of dirtifying the clothes and what it takes to wash them. I think this is what has happened, and it has disintegrated into something much bigger. Look at it this way, Betty. We have been campaigning since January. The nominations for various posts were done in March. That means 2 months before that we have been campaigning, and that is in January. Expecting March, there will be the nominations, getting into the elections, which happened in August 8th, into where we are right now, and into what we are even now looking forward to others calling for, again, 90 days after this. You can imagine the effect, the negative effect of all this. Businesses have shut down. People have gone home. They no longer have the jobs that we are talking about looking for. There is no livelihood in various places. It is disintegrating into a situation that nobody ever anticipated in those who are, and this is why I call it the child play with the mud.
Right.
And it's deepening to positions that we never would want to.
Interesting. Barack Milka, coming to you, didn't we see this one coming? Because, you know, there's a big section of Kenyans who thought that, you know, with an election, probably post 26th October, today would just be counting our votes and everything would go back to normal.
I think the issue is that as a people, we have refused to address the fundamentals of our problem. We have got very deep-seated challenges which have lived with us since independence. In the year 2008, we had an opportunity to try and address these issues. We had the Kriegler Commission, which helped us to chart out 4 specific areas that we were supposed to address. And one of those areas touched on historical injustices. It is actually appalling that today we should be talking about one country with 2 faces, as if this is something new that has just descended upon us from the blue skies. It's something that we have lived with. We live in what scholars of social science would call a Manichaean society. This is a society that obtains in a contradictory state of dualism, that you can look at the Kenyan population since independence, and you can see that it lives in two streams. There is a certain stream which is privileged, a stream which has got a monopoly of political power, social power, economic power. It's virtually everywhere in government, in enterprise. And we've gotten to a moment where in recent times, it has even become reckless. You find a governor somewhere in Eldoret telling people that after these elections, you are going to know that Kenya iko na wenyewe. You get a leader within the presidency is telling people that we eat as you salivate. These things may sound like they are jokes, but they bite deep down. And people start looking at the electoral moment as a moment that offers them the hope that they could bring about some change. And when they find that the electoral process itself is flawed, then you end up with eruptions of the kind that we are seeing. So we must not only address the possibility that we could have a transparent, acceptable, verifiable electoral system and process, but that we can also address the historical injustices that we have refused to confront.
Right. And looking back, Professor Naituli, with what has been happening, if you put every concern that was raised by both the opposition and Jubilee, what is it that we could have done differently to end up in a better way, not what we are in right now?
I think the better way would actually, to end up in a better way, would have been a meeting between the two parties, the contestants, and then look at those issues being raised, see which issues can be done within the specified time, and which cannot, satisfy one another that we have a foolproof system, certify them because it is necessary. They are participants, they are actors, and then move in that direction. It's very easy to make a very small conflict and become big. Like I can see this one unfolding into a bigger conflict. And this is what happens usually, that you usually create a conflict thinking that you can control it. And then it mutates and brings some subtexts. And eventually you also lose control of the situation that you thought. So I think for us, if we thought carefully about the country, about our children and so on, the easier thing is always to talk before things get out of hand.
Right.
Like now they appear to be getting out of hand because you talk anyway, because the truth is you're in this house together, and since you are together, there is nothing you can do with the other one.
We have to live with each
We
other.
have to live with each other.
Right.
So we need to figure out how to do that. So we cannot, the talking, even the good in book who says, come, let's reason it together. The idea is when you reason it together, you don't go and get a solution.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you say that because if you remember this election, there were really hardline stands, both from both political divides. Chef Moshado, what do you have to say about this?
You're right, Betty. An advice that I've given the principals for free and allow me to give it again. They need to shed off their hardline advisors. The people very close to them, for their own reasons, in my view, are the people who have brought them where we are. And the people haven't been doing that because they love their principles, and they haven't been doing it because they love Kenya. They're doing it for their own, to a large extent, selfish reasons. It's very unfortunate that we went for this repeat election without dialogue taking place. But having said that, I also think that we failed to focus on the Constitution as well as the Supreme Court ruling. The Supreme Court ruling, in my assessment, I took of time to read through the 75 or so pages, but also the kind of reservations that were of Justice Njoki and Professor Juan. I did identify 11 key areas that the Supreme Court talked about. The interesting thing is that all of them, except for, were technology related. So I think I would be very comfortable to talk about those that were technology related.
Right.
I think that's where we should have focused. But instead, both NASA and Jubilee went outside what the Supreme Court talked about. And I think this is where we had a problem.
Dr. Kalua, what can you say about governing this country and post October 26th? Looking at what is happening in the country, you can tell, like, really, we are a divided nation. And, like, the good professor said, these are issues that we've had for a long time, but we never seem to arrest this issue. First of all, how do we even start to arrest this issue that has been with us for a very long time? It came out, popped its head in 2007. Now, seemingly, it's doing the same.
Betty, in my opinion, what we lack is being truthful to ourselves, truthful to the Word of God.
Right.
Clearly, if indeed we are Christians as we are at the 80% plus, and that we walk according to the Word of God Almighty, and thanks to my brother Shem who has talked about the Sabbath, if we truly believe in this, that we have positioned ourselves, and even to larger extent to religionalism, where we are thinking about our religion, then we all appreciate that there is one supreme God. And there is no authority that is in power that is not of God. If God did not intend the power that is today that it should not, then it will not be. Not even for one single second. So first of all, we need to be truthful to ourselves and appreciate that. Secondly, we need to appreciate the fact that a government, a country is ruled by the rule of law. What are we talking about here? And I look forward and I appreciate when I saw Justice Maraga go to vote to actualize that which he foresaw, that which he, in his wisdom, looked at and talked about a process that must be adhered to. This is the situation that we first must appreciate. And appreciating and coming back to what I talked about, God's positioning. God favors those that he has chosen to favor, whether they work hard, whether they are asleep, he will favor them because he is naturally that way. Once we get to that and appreciate the rule of law, which calls for an election process, which is what we called for, the initial reaction, honestly speaking, and I'm glad I'm speaking my heart out. I feel like speaking it all out today. What we needed to do, instead of throwing each other into a situation that we are in today, is to follow the rule of law. The reaction that we have, if the court ruled in such a way and a manner, we should have proceeded in that manner or go back to the same court in good time so that this is appreciated and followed for posterity.
At that time. All right.
But here...
I want to bring in Professor. I see you want to say something about what he's saying.
Well, yeah, I think Dr. He has stressed a lot about God. We don't have Christians in this country.
What do you mean?
I think this is a part of self-deceit. We don't. I mean, what I mean...
We don't have Christians in this country.
No, we don't. We don't have religious people in this country. We don't have Christians in this country. And even that one, we don't want to accept. No, let me explain to you. All the corruption we do, who does it? In May 2007, we were slaughtering each other. Who was doing it? Today we have this crisis. Where are those Christians? Where are those men of God, the reasonable people, the men of reason, who are supposed to put in God first and take care of their neighbor and bring us together so we can talk? The problem here is that we lie every second. We're even lying right here.
I'm not lying.
Let him just qualify what he's saying.
Let me finish. Have you been into our churches? The people who get the first opportunity to speak, the kind of people in the church and so on. The truth of this matter is we need even to go back to that religion because we have forgotten it. If we are into it, we will not be having the corruption we have. We will not be having this crisis, if you ask me, because we will be moved by the suffering of our fellow person. We will be able to feel the pain of the other Kenyan. some of us are becoming totally incapable of feeling that pain. And you see, you can tell me you are Christian or you are Muslim, and you can't feel the pain of another Kenyan. That is not possible.
All right.
So we have a problem. We like to lie to ourselves all the time. We need to stop that. We are also ignoring. We ignored this problem. We thought it isn't there when it is looking at us. No science. And even now, we are still ignoring it.
And what is this that we're ignoring? And what do you think really is a silver bullet then? Because nobody seems to really have an answer on how to bring this country together.
This is what I think we're ignoring. When you come to me and tell me your toe has pain, I need to accept that on the face value because it's not my toe. So somebody says he has a problem. Tell the person, no, you don't have a problem. Okay, you're just a bad person.
Right.
Okay, we need to transcend that. We need to stop that. And we need to listen to one another.
All right, and I will be coming back to, the commission because really it's almost at the center of this. We'll come to that shortly. Barack Luka, we wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, first of all, it always upsets me when people pay lip service to religion, and particularly Christianity, and when they cite the Bible selectively, or sometimes out of pure innocence. This thing about power and power coming from God, and that everybody who is in a position of power, authority, rulers, that they are God ordained, is a falsehood. It's a fallacy. If you have interacted with the Christian scripture, and you are an honest person, then you will even see that God's prophets from the old days have a lot of problems with the kings whom God does not recognize. And when you read such a place as the book of the prophet Hosea, in chapter 8 at verse 4, he tells you very clearly that you crown for yourselves kings who do not have my anointment, kings whom I do not recognize. And this world has had very many dictators and usurpers of power and oppressors. And they would, of course, maybe want to use Romans 13 and say that all authority and all power is vested to human beings by God. So I think let us not go there. Let us just come back here and face our problems and the reality that informs our context.
Head on.
And the first thing is that in 1960, 62, we went to Lancaster. Why were we going to Lancaster House? We went to Lancaster because before the British came here, they found us living as disparate communities. Each of these communities was a nation in its own right. But these people brought us together under the colonial dispensation. So when they were going away and they were going with their laws and with their order, we had to ask ourselves one question. Do we remain in this artificial, geographical, political, and social arrangement in which these people have forced us, or do we go back to where we used to be? What do we do?
All right.
You saw that people like the Somali up north even wanted to join their brothers and sisters in a greater Somalia, and that became a problem for quite some time. And that challenge obtained in other parts of Africa as well. We had the Ogaden in Ethiopia and so on.
Right.
But here we said, let us stay together. But as we got close to entering the house, we were still very suspicious of one another.
All right.
And we were saying, do we get there under a federated system, or do we get there under a Unitarian system? And there were people who were coming from what were called the small tribes.
Right.
And they were fearing that they would be dominated by big tribes.
Right.
So from that moment onwards, that division, that suspicion has been there. There are tribes that believe that they must rule, and that the rest of the tribes must be ruled. And when you rule, all the opportunities are yours. That when we look at the architecture of government, when we look at the government departments, the parastatals, when we look at the opportunities to do business with the government, whatever it is we look at, it belongs to you. Everybody else is excluded. Now, that is where the challenge begins.
All right.
And so
And that is my question, because really, then what solution is there? And we'll come back to this conversation shortly, but we have to take a break right now. So we'll take that break, but we're coming back to hear the sentiments of my panelists in a few minutes.